So for the second installment of this video, I'm going to be showing you how I made all the drawers. And usually that doesn't take a whole video, but because I had this application molding added to the front, that was kind of detailed and it took a little bit longer than making regular inset solid doors. So I've already started editing that video, and I know that that's pretty much going to be the entire video. The third portion of the build is going to be all the decorative carving. So you can see there's nothing's attached yet, but there's an application carving at the bottom, which is not structural, it's solely decorative, as well as the top I've been working on. I'm almost finished. The entire not the entire perimeter, because the back won't be carved, but most of the top of it will be carved, as well as this is going to have 8 knobs, and the knobs will be carved as well. That's the only thing I haven't really started on this. You can see I've already started patching my holes from the brads, and then this will be painted. So that will be basically what the second and third video will cover. So to start this, I started by making my drawer boxes, and since these are inset drawers, there's not a lot of wiggle room in your drawer boxes, and because my 2 openings are a little bit different sized, I decided to make the 2 bottom drawers first. So this is just testing out my jig to get it set up before cutting all of my pieces. So I rough cut all of my plywood pieces to size, and the size of the drawer boxes is based on the cabinet. So I think they're about 6 3/4 high by about 28 inches wide and about 11 inches deep. And once I have that jig set up, I could go through and cut all the dovetails in my drawer boxes. This is one of those cheap knockoff jigs, and once you get it set up, it works really well for repetitive making of drawers. You can see it's easy to flip all the pieces around. You kind of have to finagle it and make sure everything's sitting flush and flat. But once you have it set up, it cuts really nice dovetails, and they're just the nicest joint for making drawer boxes. The fronts, you never really have to worry about them pulling out once they're glued in place. So this will cut the front panel and the 2 sides, and then I'm going to go through and add the groove about a 1/2 inch up from the bottom on all of my pieces, and that will receive the bottom of the cabinet. Now these are kind of wide drawers, but they're very shallow, so I'm using about 3 32 inch ply on the bottom. So once I cut the first groove, which is only going to be an 1/8 inch wide because that's how thick my blade is, I marked on the panel where the plywood will meet. I moved my fence over a little bit, and I'm cutting that groove a little bit wider. So I'm testing that panel, and once it's set up, I could send all of my pieces through, and then I'll have that groove on all of my pieces. So on the back side of this panel, I'm going to cut a dado, and that dado will receive the back panel. There's not as much force on the back panel, so you don't have to worry about putting dovetails back there. A dado is perfectly fine. So once I have that set up, and this is going to be a 1/2 inch panel, because of coronavirus, a lot of these projects I tried to get all of my materials before the stores closed, but that also means that I don't necessarily have everything I need. That's just the way life works. So there's some different products I'm using for pieces. So I usually don't use 1/2 inch ply on the back. I stick with 3/4 inch ply, but since I didn't have enough 3/4, the back became 1/2 inch ply. So then I'm going to make sure my 2 edges are square, dry fitting this panel together. And I already had my plywood cut to length, and then you could see I could slide it into the drawer box. So I make these as I go. I find it's easiest to square them up, get a measurement, and cut my pieces, then cut all of my pieces in the beginning and kind of hope they fit. There's always going to be little differences in all of these components. So then I could add the backer, put a little bit of glue in that dado. I measured the backer, slid it into place, always making sure it's square. It's super important that these drawers are square because I'm not using mechanical drawer slides on this, because the customer wanted the cabinet to be as light as possible, and metal drawer slides add a lot of weight to a cabinet, especially if I would need 8 of them for this. So I'm checking to make sure my box is square, and then once I get it square, I'll sink a bunch of brads through my back panel and the bottom panel, and then this will be pretty shored up. And I'm keeping it in place overnight, making sure that my clearances are where they should be. If your box is unsquare and you slide it into your carcass, you'll be able to tell pretty quickly. So that's kind of the gap I'm going for. It's about a 1/16 of an inch is what I made these. 1/16 of an inch smaller on either side. So those are the two. I made two to start. And then I'm attaching these with just a slide on the inside of the cabinet. It's kind of an old school way of making these drawers work before the mechanical drawer slides were made. So what I'm doing is I'm putting a 1/2 inch dado on the sides of my cabinet. So on one side I could slide it through and stop before the front of the cabinet because I don't want it to go all the way through. Where you stop is going to be the stopper for the stop that's on the inside of the cabinet, and then on the back panel I'm going to have to lower onto the blade and slide it. And then once that's done, I clean up the edge with a chisel. So this is corian. It's actually a kitchen countertop material. It's a resin plastic. They use this for kitchen countertops, and since it's a resin plastic material, I won't have to worry about it being subjected to the same rules as lumber for seasonal humidity. It also has such a smooth surface that the cabinets will slide nicely against it. So I just made a spacer that was a little bit thicker than the groove on the side of my cabinets. The groove on the side of my cabinets was about 3 inches up, so that spacer is about 3 1/16 to get the reveal I want on the bottom. And then I just screwed that corian in place. The corian, the depth of it coincides with the depth on the side of the cabinet so that they stop where I want them to stop. And you can see they're set in place. And then I made the other drawer boxes now. I'm not going to show it because it's the exact same process, and I just calculated it to make sure I had that 1/16 of an inch reveal on the top and bottom. And the two cabinets I made, the two drawer boxes, ended up being the exact same size, which was nice. So then on the front side of the cabinet I went through and added edge banding to the front before I added the molding. Doing edge banding I find to be extremely boring, but if you're using plywood to make a lot of these pieces, it's a great, quick, inexpensive way to finish up the edge of that plywood. I actually have an edge banding iron, but you can use a regular iron as well. And also I edge band the top of all the drawer boxes. Like I said, it's just a matter of cutting it to size and then using that iron to adhere it to the cabinet. So this is birch maple ply, and then the edge banding is also the same thing. So that is what the cabinet looks with all the drawers in place. And now the drawers could be finagled a little bit with stops to get them to set where you want, but since I was adding the thickness of the molding, they're actually set into the cabinet. So I bought molding to frame out these drawers, but if you watch the first video, you know that originally it was only going to be 2 drawers, so I only had enough molding for 2 drawers. So I had some poplar, so I decided to make my own molding out of poplar because I couldn't go to the store. So I'm just cutting 3/4 inch poplar into about 1/2 inch strips. Then I have a router bit in my router table, and I'm just sending those strips of poplar through the router table to get the profile I want, which is an OG profile. And making your old molding is a great way to go about it, but it's one of those things where buying it is arguably less expensive than making it because the time to make it is usually worth more than it is to buy it. So I don't make a ton of my own moldings unless it's for a little amount. So then to put all this molding onto the front of the drawer boxes, I'm going to be mitering all the corners. So I have some miter jigs for my table saw crosscut sled. I don't use them a lot, but they're invaluable when I do. So I can attach these using my quick square in order to So I'm using that quick square in order to get the 45-degree angle I need, and then I could tighten down those two jigs. So they're spaced a little bit off of the crosscut sled because you have to pretty much have them cut to size before using this jig, but it's great because I could cut the two miters I need without making any changes. So I go through with my molding and cut a piece first, which I have here, and I'm checking to make sure it's square before I cut all of my pieces. So I could cut that 45 on one edge, kind of put it in place, and mark it and cut the other one. Now on these joints I sneak up on them, so I'm constantly going back and forth. I'll rip it down on the radial arm saw, like I said, because if it's too long it will hit the back edge of that crosscut sled, and then I'll creep up on my mark and then test it on the cabinet and sometimes make minor adjustments. So I have some pennies in place, which are almost a perfect 1/16 of an inch reveal, and I'm just having this sit on top of some pennies. So you can see that sitting on top of some pennies. And then the bottom one, once I have it perfect, I'll permanently attach it. So I'm using just some glue and some brads, and I'll permanently attach it to the front side of the cabinet. And those pennies are great for shimming these up the perfect amount. Then once I have that, I'll start building the sides. So you can see I have the side already closely pre-cut to the size I need. Once again, using pennies on the side so that the reveal is just about perfect. And then once I have my marks, I'll cut them down on the crosscut sled and then put them back into place. So the two sides are about the same, so I'll go over to the radial arm saw and rough cut the side for the other side once this one's done. You can see I have it rough cut. I'll make a mark and then go cut it on the crosscut sled. This is kind of, like I said in the beginning of the video, a little bit of a tedious process, but it ended up giving me pretty much near perfect results. And then, like I said, you could see we'll make small cuts and then go. It's with angles like this, I find it's easiest to creep up on it than to cut too much, because then you're going to end up recutting it. So then I can slide some pennies in the side so the reveal is perfect off the edge. I'll tape those into place and then I'll cut the top. So I already have one side cut. I'll make a mark and then creep up on that mark. And then that one fits into place as well. So you can see how if your drawer boxes aren't perfect or the side of your carcass isn't perfect, with using the pennies you'll get a perfect reveal. It might stick out when you pull the drawer box out, it might stick out a little bit on the sides, or it might the side of the drawer box might be a little proud of the molding, but once all the drawers are closed, which is what you're going to be looking at 95% of the time, it will look about perfect. So once I had all those cut, you could see I'm just adding some glue, once again using the pennies as shims, and then attaching everything with brads. For the top, I worked my way up with these drawers. I used pennies off the top and followed the exact same process. So you could see for the top, adding the pennies, and I'll do the bottom, permanently attach the bottom, and then work my way around the sides, and that's what I did for the entire cabinet, working my way up. So the end result, like I said, it took some time, but the end result I was extremely happy with.